The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 16th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned his manager and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking this position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil.' He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat.' He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager, because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I really miss the days of living in the midst of this familiar image that we have of Jesus. But I'm sure you've seen this one. It's that picture of Jesus where he's sitting on a field or a hillside on a rock, smiling, and he's surrounded by a whole mess of children. I mean, I like it because I can imagine the story that he's telling these children. They look to be stories about how much they are loved and how they are to love one another. Or stories about how the light will cast away the darkness that they're going to experience in their lives. Or stories of hope and healing. Because when we think of that image of Jesus sitting on a hillside with these children and telling them stories, I'm guessing he's not telling them parables like the one we got this morning. You know, children, gather around. Let me tell you about a conniving manager who swindled his boss and his boss's debtors. When this manager was about to be fired, he did even more conniving, and he saved his job. And they all lived happily ever after. I think the happily ever after needs to show up in the Bible way more often, really. It would make these parables a lot easier to handle. But it's not there. Because maybe these parables aren't supposed to be easy to handle. I think they're meant to push us and stretch us and make us think. Especially when we hear Jesus wrapping up a parable with, "Make friends for yourself by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes." What? I mean, was anyone else confused by this parable? I mean, if you were, you're in good company. Trying to find some meaning to this parable through exploring other people's interpretations brings up almost as many options as there are sources to read. This isn't a straightforward parable, and really, I think the best we can do today is explore some of the possibilities of what it could mean. Because when you first read through it, it just doesn't seem fair, right? The dishonest manager is threatened with the loss of his job because of his dishonesty. So then from what we hear, it seems like there's more dishonesty, and the manager seems to toss some of this rich man's possessions to the side. This debtor gets his debt cut in half, and this debtor gets 20% off the bill. Well, that's not fair. Well, the dishonest manager gets praised for these actions. That's not fair. And then Jesus seems to equate all this dishonesty and these people with success and accomplishment. That's not fair. Are we talking about the same Jesus here? The one who taught us to love God and love one another? Well, maybe fairness is missing the point. I mean, maybe the lesson here is that that wealth and worldly accomplishments can be and are fleeting. I mean, one day you're on top of the world, or as I've heard some describe our economic system, you're on the top of the food chain, and the next day you aren't. It may be completely your fault. Your ways of success may be through conniving and cheating, and one day those ways are revealed and you have to face the consequences, just like we've seen through many corporations and banks, but also through some hometown individuals. Or one day everything comes crashing down around you through no fault of your own. You might lose your job, your savings, your retirement, your health, your loved ones, not because of something you did, but because we live in a fragile and breakable world where bad stuff has been known to happen. But the hope is that our hope is in something bigger than wealth and success. So that in those times we know what is worldly and what is eternal, and which one of those two is life-giving. I mean, could that be Jesus' happily ever after? Or what if Jesus is actually impressed with this dishonesty and with the ways that this manager handled his situation? What if Jesus wished his followers were as conniving as that manager was? In fact, Jesus called what this guy did shrewd. He thought this manager was clever and intelligent for handling the things the way he did. When he was faced with a dire situation, with the loss of his job and with his identity, this manager took what he had and made it work. Jesus said, and his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. Who are the children of light then? I don't know. Could it be Jesus' followers? Those who claim to be followers of God and God's ways? Who maybe aren't doing a whole lot or doing what they've been called to do? It seems like we have been entrusted, just like this manager was, with great riches. We've been entrusted with the news, the good news, and with the joy, and with the hope, and with the love of God. But often we'll take this wealth, these riches, this good news, and we stick it between the mattresses so we don't lose it, and so we know where it is when we face a rainy day. But then if that rainy day comes, we still might forget about it and leave that hope we have in God just tucked away. But that manager didn't do that. He used those riches. He used them to make his boss even richer. He used them to make himself more successful. And when trouble came, he used them to help out those debtors. Yeah, it was selfish, but in a way that benefited both them and the rich boss. Shrewd indeed. And so why aren't we that shrewd, this clever or creative or forthright when we face the challenges of this world, and when we know good and well that God's word can bring healing in life? And the manager didn't resign himself to the fact that he was about to lose his job. He went out into the world with what he had been given to make something better of a bad situation. I mean, I honestly can't stand this parable, I'll tell you that. With the dishonesty and the cheating and the selfishness. But, I don't know, maybe Jesus is trying anything he can. anything that might actually ring a bell and make a connection or make sense for his hearers to get them, to get us, to listen up. There's a quote that's attributed to St. Augustine, whether he said it or not, we'll say he did. And he believed that in this world, God gave us people to love and things to use. But because this world has tricked us and it's filled with evil and sin, we've decided that God gave us things to love and people to use. And by doing that, we simply allow the ways of the world to continue and perpetuate. So how do we get back to this original idea of loving people and using the things that we've been provided? How can we use our wealth and riches, whether we believe it's minimal or bountiful, to be shrewd for God and for God's kingdom, or to be shrewd for one another? How can we get out there and make something happen instead of sitting on our hands and succumbing to the idea that we can't do anything? Well, why don't we tear apart this parable just a little bit more, and we can ask the question, who did the dishonest manager end up depending on when he faced this crisis? It wasn't his rich boss. It wasn't his wallet full of saved up earnings. It wasn't any other talents that he had hidden away for another day. I mean, this manager ended up being dependent on the debtors. Given the tone of this story and our understanding of how business was conducted in that time and place, and knowing that this manager was caught squandering and stealing, I think it's safe to assume that these debtors were being taken advantage of. They owed a debt that hadn't been able to be repaid, probably because this manager was stealing much of this payment. But yet when push comes to shove, the manager was saved through cooperation with these debtors, which he probably wasn't expecting. Much like how we don't expect God to show up in the places where God shows up. And I find that hopeful. When we're in the midst of mess and sin, God is there. When we're in the midst of pain and death, God is there. When we're in the most godless place ever, God is there. Jesus is on to us. He knows we struggle. He knows this world holds endless temptations, but he also knows that we aren't hopeless. There is good in us that we can do something with and make a difference. There is wealth in and among us that we can use for good. And there is endless love that can change this world. Thanks be to God. Amen.